Our story tonight begins with a sound, the low, steady murmur of London, 1930. But our focus isn't on the street, it's inside, with the quiet rhythm of a woman polishing brass. Her name was Gladys Aylward. To the world, she was a parlour maid, living a life defined by quiet routine. But in her heart, a map was unfurled, a map leading to the rugged, distant mountains of China. It was a dream that seemed impossible to every ear but God's, a great, wild calling that was about to break her small, predictable life wide open. Gladys had grown up in Edmonton, North London, a child of the working class. She found steady work as a parlour maid, a trusted employee in respectable homes. She knew the feel of polished silverware, the quiet efficiency of serving a meal, and the simple beauty of a perfectly tidied room. This was her world, neat, contained, and entirely predictable. But a calling is often the interruption of the predictable. For Gladys, this interruption came not as a dramatic vision or a booming voice from the sky, but as a persistent, undeniable stirring toward the vast, unknowable country of China. Imagine the quiet certainty of that purpose now, settling softly into your own awareness. The rhythm of your breath is steady, deliberate, and even in this stillness, the quiet voice of purpose can break through. It is not a demand for strength, but an invitation to trust, just as it was for Gladys. She sought every avenue to make this distant reality possible. She was a working woman, uneducated by the standards of the missionary establishment, without the financial backing or institutional support customary for such an immense undertaking. In her early 20s, Gladys applied to the most prominent organization, the China Inland Mission. For weeks, she waited with a contained, hopeful patience. They were the experts, they were the gateway. But sometimes, the human institution of expertise does not see the divine potential. The reply came back, quiet and definitive. Gladys Aylward was rejected. She was deemed unsuitable. Let the sound of that judgment fade softly away. It was a human verdict, irrelevant to the strength of her calling. The missionary board, looking only at her lack of formal education and working-class background, saw a risk, not a vessel for extraordinary grace. The door closed firmly on the conventional path. Yet, the deep, steady commitment of Gladys Aylward was not dependent on human approval. A belief in God was a personal covenant, not a professional application. Instead of retreating, she responded with radical, focused obedience. If the mission would not fund her, she would fund herself. If the path was not a grand ocean liner, it would be a lonely, winding railway track. Gladys made a vow to save every possible penny from her meager wages. She lived with a single, austere goal: to accumulate enough money for a one-way ticket to China. She committed to a savings plan so strict, so absolute, that it allowed her to set aside a small, regular amount each day. This was the famous 9 pence a day savings plan. Let your own striving fade now and rest in the profound simplicity of that goal. 9 pence a day. It was not a sudden lottery win or a massive donation. It was the diligent accumulation of sacrifice. This incremental saving was an act of faith, a quiet, daily rehearsal of the belief that God was leading her. Every shilling withheld, every small luxury forgone, was a prayer in action, a tangible step toward her destiny. This period, though lived in quiet rooms, was the most cinematic part of her preparation. It was the training ground where her determination was forged, where her trust in the sufficiency of God rather than the sufficiency of banks or missions, took root. She was learning independence, resilience, and the power of a single-minded purpose. Her focus point was the northern province of Shanxi, a remote and rugged land largely untouched by Western missionaries deep within the interior of China. She learned that a seasoned, elderly Scottish missionary named Jeannie Lawson ran a small operation there, and it was to her that Gladys began to write, seeking a small, independent foothold. The very idea was absurd, traveling unescorted, without organized papers, to the furthest reaches of Eurasia, all on the strength of a parlour-maid savings. It was a journey that in those days cost more than her entire life's possessions. Yet, the steady, rhythmic gathering of coins continued until finally the stack was tall enough. The quiet woman of the polished brass stepped away from the known, having secured not a safe, reserved berth on a steamship, but an incredibly cheap, incredibly perilous ticket on the Trans-Siberian Railway. Her choice of route was itself an act of faith, a leap into the unknown wilderness of communism and conflict, demonstrating that God often calls us not just to a destination, but to a path of radical dependence. She knew no one, she spoke none of the necessary languages, and she carried a mere few pounds of possessions. She was unsuitable, untrained, and unsupported, yet she was undeniably called. And that, in the quiet truth of faith, was all that mattered. Rest now in the courage of that conviction. The ticket was purchased, the destination was set, and the quiet rhythm of the London life was about to be broken by the cold, vast sound of the steel rails. Gladys Aylward closed the door on the familiar behind her. As you close your own eyes on the day, let the conviction that God uses the unsuitable settle over you. Tomorrow, we will follow the sound of the engine as she begins her long journey eastward across the iron road of isolation. All the experts told her the journey was too great, the preparation too small, and the risk far too severe for a lone woman. Yet, Gladys Aylward looked at the stack of meager coins she had saved, a sum representing years of diligent work and countless small sacrifices, and saw not the inadequacy of human finances, but the unwavering promise of divine provision. This accumulation of 9pence a day was not just money. It was the physical manifestation of her obedience, the evidence of a trust so absolute it defied all common sense. Her departure from London was quiet, almost invisible. There were no fanfare or official send-offs, only the simple, profound goodbye to the life she had known. She carried with her only a small suitcase, a few essentials, and her one-way ticket to Tientsin, the Chinese city that served as the endpoint of the Trans-Siberian Railway. To reach her ultimate destination, the remote inner province of Shanxi, she would have to travel thousands of miles more. But the railway ticket was the great leap of faith, the initial breaking away from the shore. Pause now and simply appreciate the magnitude of that initial step. It is the moment when a dream is placed into motion, when the long, quiet savings become a tangible, terrifying action. Rest in that quiet turning point, knowing that often the greatest journeys are launched not by massive force, but by a series of small, faithful movements. The reason for choosing the Trans-Siberian route was purely logistical. It was the cheapest way to traverse the enormous distance between England and the Far East. It was also, in 1930, perhaps the most unpredictable and dangerous route for a lone, young foreign woman. This was a path that took her directly through the Soviet Union, a region increasingly marked by political unrest and closed borders, a sharp contrast to the familiar security of the English Channel. The journey began in the reliable, rhythmic comfort of Western European trains. But soon, as she headed east, the world outside her window began to change. The land grew vast, the settlements sparse, and the air of security gradually gave way to an atmosphere of cold uncertainty. She was leaving the ordered world for the unpredictable expanse of the Eurasian landmass, heading toward an unknown destiny powered by nothing but steel wheels and singular determination. Gladys traveled third class, enduring long, cramped hours in a wooden carriage filled with the changing population of travelers, rough laborers, anxious families, and uniformed guards. The lack of a common language meant that her communication was reduced to simple gestures, shared food, and the patient demonstration of her goodwill. This isolation was, in a deeper sense, part of her training. It stripped away all human crutches, forcing her to rely entirely upon the silent, steady presence of God. As the train crossed the Ural Mountains and plunged into the massive, freezing expanse of Siberia, the conditions grew harsher. This was the legendary Siberian winter, a landscape of endless snow, biting cold, and a desolate silence that seemed to swallow all human sound. She had limited food, and the meager warmth in her carriage was often insufficient against the severe temperatures that dropped far below freezing. In the quiet, rhythmic rocking of the train, she cultivated the practice of reliance. When the hunger was sharp, she learned to look to God for the next small meal, trusting in the promise of daily bread. When the cold crept into her bones, she learned to find warmth in the constancy of her purpose. She was being stripped of comforts not to punish her, but to prepare her, to teach her to find contentment in the barest of circumstances, a skill she would desperately need in the years ahead. The steady rhythm of the train became a meditation itself. Cluck, 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 cluck. Going east, going east. It is worth dwelling on the nature of this financial focus. The 9 pence a day was a constant, daily affirmation of faith, a profound demonstration that she valued the divine commission more than her own personal ease. It was a sustained, calculated, and deliberate act of faith. This focused saving gave her passage a moral weight far heavier than its actual cost. It was a witness that God uses the persistent, small efforts of the faithful to achieve His greatest purposes. Imagine her sitting by the small, grimy window, looking out onto the endless expanse of frozen forests and silent plains. There was no one to encourage her, no friend to share her fears, only the infinite, overwhelming silence of a world rushing past. The emotional toll of this isolation was immense, yet it was precisely in this solitude that her spiritual resilience grew strongest. As the train approached the Manchurian border, the political landscape caught up to the quiet parlor maid. The conflicts between the Soviet Union and China were heating up, and the once reliable rail line became a precarious channel of danger. Whispers turned to shouts, and eventually the guards entered her carriage with urgent, hostile commands. She did not understand the language, but the grim faces and pointing rifles communicated the message clearly. The line was closed. The train was forced to stop in a remote, desolate town near the border. Gladys, along with the remaining passengers, was ordered off the train. Her initial leap of faith had brought her thousands of miles, But now, the iron road had ended prematurely, leaving her utterly stranded in a cold, foreign town where she was regarded with suspicion and fear. She had successfully crossed most of the Eurasian continent, powered by ninepence a day. Yet, the final, crucial stretch into China was now blocked. The experts had been right to warn her. The peril was real, but the experts had not accounted for the depth of her trust. She was left with a single, crucial reality. The ninepence was spent, the ticket was used, and the mission organization had long ago rejected her. She had nothing left but the quiet, constant presence of the God who had called her. The challenge now was not the saving, but the surviving. Not the journey, but the navigation of a sudden, dangerous stop. Her physical safety was compromised, her future uncertain, and the goal of reaching Shanxi seemed to vanish into the dense political fog surrounding her. In this moment of profound uncertainty, let your own anxieties about the path ahead be quieted. Rest in the knowledge that even when a meticulously planned journey is broken by forces outside your control, the ultimate purpose remains guarded by an infinitely capable power. Gladys Aylward, the parlor maid, had reached the edge of her own strength, and the stage was now set for a different kind of miracle. She found a temporary lodging in the small hostile border town, facing down the despair of being utterly alone. The rhythmic click of the train wheels was replaced by the uneasy silence of a town bracing for conflict. She knew she could not stay, and she could not go back. The only way left was forward, through the unpredictable landscape of war and closed borders. The quiet discipline of saving ninepence a day had delivered her here to this moment of ultimate dependence. Now, her inner faith would have to execute the next steps, relying on wisdom, courage, and an entirely supernatural navigation system. She was stranded, vulnerable, and alone. But the God who had honored the journey of one penny at a time was certainly still present in the isolation of the frozen borderlands. The final leg of the journey required a new kind of boldness. Close your eyes now and rest in the silent strength that allows a person to stand firm, even when the steel rails end and the next path is invisible. The great land of China was waiting just beyond the military checkpoints, and the resolute woman who had saved her way across a continent was not about to turn back. As you drift towards sleep, know that the most powerful movements in history often begin not with a roar, but with a quiet, audacious step of faith, proving that God's provision is always greater than human planning. Tomorrow, we will see how her trust carries her over that invisible, dangerous border. The iron road of isolation. The train carriage was small, cold, and lonely. But for Gladys Aylward, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels had been the sound of destiny unfolding. Now, that sound was silenced. She was stranded in the vast, frozen landscape of Eurasia, holding on to nothing but a single phrase of scripture and the profound, terrifying belief that God was her sole companion. Rest now and feel the cold isolation of that moment, the immense silence that falls when a planned path abruptly ends. The Trans-Siberian Railway had delivered her faithfully across thousands of miles, but the geopolitical conflicts had intervened, closing the line and depositing her in a remote, hostile border town near the Siberian frontier. She found herself in a small, rough lodging, an island of anxiety in a sea of snow. The town was tense, filled with uniformed men, and the heavy air of political uncertainty. Gladys spoke no Russian and her meager Chinese vocabulary was useless here. A small supply of money, the fruit of years of ninepence a day savings, was dwindling rapidly, and there was no obvious way to continue her journey. The logic of the world screamed at her to turn back, to admit the impossibility, to find a way to retreat to the familiar security of London. After all, the official mission society had deemed her unsuitable for the work. Perhaps the universe was confirming their judgment. But the calling that had compelled her to save every penny was not a logic-based command. It was a deep, spiritual certainty. She knew she was meant to be in China, and so the impossible barrier became simply the next obstacle to overcome, the next opportunity for God to demonstrate His power. Feel the strength of that quiet resolution, that refusal to be deterred by the sheer scale of the opposition. It is the spiritual armor of the persistent heart. Gladys realized that the railway was finished, but the journey was not. She had to find an alternate route, a way to traverse the mountainous, hostile region that separated her from the relative safety of Tientsin. The only path available was an arduous, treacherous overland journey by any means possible, including donkey cart, foot, and ferry. She began to move, demonstrating the quiet resourcefulness that often characterizes great faith. She navigated the border region, a chaotic mix of Russian and Chinese influence, relying entirely on the kindness of strangers and the subtle nudging of providence. Imagine her walking now, a small, solitary figure, dwarfed by the massive landscape, the wind biting at her face. This leg of the journey was marked by profound physical hardship. The terrain was rough, often requiring her to climb steep, icy passes. She endured days without proper food or rest, sleeping in cold, rough shelters, or sometimes simply under the stars. The extreme cold, a constant, heavy presence, seeped into her clothing and her bones. In this prolonged discomfort, her heart was being purified of dependence on the material world. When the body is utterly exhausted, the soul often finds its sharpest clarity. She was learning to depend on the unseen, to draw warmth from a spiritual fire that the Siberian cold could not extinguish. She traveled by slow, jolting carts, sometimes hitching rides with farmers or traders who were astonished by this tiny, persistent foreign woman. She encountered guards and officials who questioned her presence because she carried no official papers or institutional backing. Her story of simply being on a mission for God was both unbelievable and, perhaps, disarming in its utter simplicity. There was no complex political agenda to uncover, only the quiet, steadfast faith of a parlour maid. The true focus of this chapter is the profound isolation. In our modern world, we are rarely truly alone. Our minds are often filled with the noise of the day, the voices of others, and the constant rush of information. But for Gladys, there was a total, silent severing from the familiar. This isolation became a sacred space. It was here, surrounded by the wilderness and the cold, that the words of Scripture became intensely real, no longer comforting phrases, but living, practical promises. She traveled day after day, week after week, across the rugged terrain, crossing swollen streams and vast, lonely stretches of land. There was no map she could rely on, only the constant, deliberate practice of asking for direction and trusting the next small sign. Rest now in the simple rhythm of her movement. One step, then the next, a deliberate, focused progression across the earth. At one point, as she approached a region of heavy military presence, she was in great peril of being detained. Her foreign status, coupled with the instability of the region, made her an immediate target for suspicion. She was forced to hide, relying on the secret kindness of local villagers who sheltered her, recognizing her simple, honest purpose. It is often in the moments of greatest danger that God reveals His presence most clearly, not by removing the threat entirely, but by providing a small, unlooked-for shield. The villagers saw her not as a symbol of foreign power, but as a deeply vulnerable human being on an incomprehensible mission. This shared vulnerability created a bond, proving that genuine love and courage transcend cultural and language barriers. They risked their own safety to guide her, sharing their meager food and pointing her toward the next stage of the journey. This entire stage of the voyage, the overland trek after the railway failed, was a testament to God's faithful provision through human instruments. The money had run out, the transport was gone, but the necessary guidance, the necessary shelter, and the necessary food appeared exactly at the moment of need. It was a pilgrimage sustained not by wealth, but by the chain of small kindnesses that God orchestrates across the globe. She eventually reached the vast open plains, closer now to the inner provinces of China. The air began to change, losing the bitter intensity of the Siberian north. She was drawing closer to the culture and the language she had spent her quiet evenings studying back in London. The sight of the distant, familiar Chinese characters on a roadside sign must have felt like a sudden, warm burst of hope after months of wandering. The journey taught her that preparation is essential, but absolute dependence is necessary. She learned that a missionary's most critical asset is not their resume or their savings account, but their unflappable trust in the path laid out before them. She had faced danger, starvation, political barriers, and overwhelming loneliness, and yet she had never been truly alone. The iron road had ended, but her journey had simply transformed into a walk of pure faith. It was a trial by wilderness, an unwritten curriculum designed by God to prepare the parlor maid for the monumental tasks that awaited her in the Shanxi Mountains. She would soon need this quiet resilience to face challenges far greater than cold and hunger. Rest now in the deep, sustaining power of faith under pressure. Imagine the relief as Gladys finally nears the great cities of China, knowing that the most dangerous part of her journey is almost complete. She was about to step into the tumultuous, beautiful, and overwhelming reality of China. The city of Tianjin, though still far from her ultimate mountain destination, represented the successful passage from one world to another, a journey of thousands of miles, accomplished by the courage of a woman and the grace of an amazing God. The next challenge would not be survival, but the delicate, difficult work of fitting in. As you settle towards sleep, feel the sense of arrival, the quiet triumph of endurance over obstacles. Tomorrow, we will find the lantern light waiting for her arrival in the small mountain village that would become her true home. The lantern light in Yangcheng, after weeks of cold and uncertainty, navigating the frozen rails and the desolate overland path, the jagged peaks of the Shanxi province finally came into view. This was the landscape of her calling, the high, rugged territory she'd only seen on maps in her quiet London rooms. And in the small, unwelcoming village of Yangcheng, one lone lantern was waiting, held by a woman who would become a vital, if challenging, partner. Allow your mind to settle now on the image of these mountains, the sheer scale of the landscape that dwarfed the small figures of humanity moving beneath them. This was the China of Gladys Aylward's vision, immense, ancient, and indifferent to her presence. The successful arrival was a triumph of faith over logistics, but it was only the beginning of the true labor. Gladys had finally made contact with Jeannie Lawson, the elderly Scottish missionary she had corresponded with. Jeannie Lawson was a figure as eccentric as she was devoted. She was fiercely independent, having left the organized mission field years before to carve out her own highly personal ministry in this remote corner of Shanxi. Jeannie Lawson was not looking for a subordinate. She was looking for a partner, and a unique plan required unique people. The focus of their ministry was an old, dilapidated, and structurally unsound building they acquired right on the main mule road through the village. Mule trains were the lifeblood of transport in this mountainous region, carrying goods, supplies, and news across great distances. The mule drivers were tough, solitary men who spent their lives on the road and needed rest and provisions when they stopped in Yangqing. Jeannie Lawson had purchased the building with an audacious, practical vision. They would run it as an inn. Think of the beautiful simplicity of this idea. Their mission would not begin with grand sermons in a built sanctuary, but with practical hospitality in a place of rest. They would meet the greatest needs of the travelers first: shelter, warmth, food, and then, only then, offer them the ultimate comfort of the gospel. The name Jeannie Lawson settled on for their establishment was profoundly important to the local Chinese culture. The Inn of the Eighth Happiness. The number 8 is deeply significant, often symbolizing perfection and wholeness. The mission was to offer 7 earthly comforts like food, shelter, and companionship, and then gently introduce the 8th, the happiness of knowing God. Gladys embraced the vision. She was a parlor maid by trade. Hospitality, cleaning, and efficient domesticity were her expertise. She could cook, she could organize, and she understood the rhythm of service. Her practical skills, deemed unsuitable by the mission board, were the very foundation upon which this remote ministry was built. The God who had called her had already equipped her. The work was grueling. The inn was old and constantly needed repair. The mule drivers were rough, suspicious, and often intoxicated, demanding service without offering respect. Gladys and Jeannie Lawson had to work tirelessly, not just as ministers, but as innkeepers, cooks, and cleaners, serving their challenging clientele with constant, unwavering grace. Imagine the atmosphere in the courtyard each evening. The loud shouts in a language Gladys was still struggling to master. The smell of dust and mule sweat. The fire crackling beneath the cooking pot. This was her church, her sanctuary, her training ground. The mule drivers were their congregation. These men spent months away from home, lonely and weary, seeking simple human connection. At night, after the hearty meal was served and the mules were tethered, Jeannie Lawson and Gladys Aylward would gather the men, not for a formal lecture, but for simple biblical storytelling. The focus was always on narrative, on the vivid, compelling stories of the scriptures that spoke of creation, sin, and redemption. These were stories of a God who sought out the lost, who healed the broken, and who provided for the weary traveler. Themes that resonated deeply with men who lived a life of risk and constant wandering. The success of the inn was dependent upon their reputation for honesty and generosity. Word traveled slowly but surely along the Silk Road trails that in Yangcheng, two foreign women offered a place of genuine respite. Gradually, the hardened, suspicious faces began to soften, and the mule drivers began to call Gladys by a name that spoke of her character, Aylward. Aylward means the virtuous one, or more colloquially, the great one. It was a term of profound respect, acknowledging her integrity, her strength, and her tireless effort on their behalf. This naming was a vital step in her ministry, establishing her not as an intruder, but as a recognized figure of moral authority within the community. The relationship between Gladys and Jeannie Lawson, however, was strained. Jeannie Lawson was independent to a fault and was often resistant to Gladys's youth and different methods. The two women, both fiercely dedicated to God, often found themselves clashing over the daily administration of the inn. Rest in the realization that even in the most dedicated acts of service, human relationships remain complex. The friction between them highlights a deeper truth. God often accomplishes His mission through imperfect people working in uneasy partnership. He does not require flawless unity, only faithful obedience to the shared purpose. The ministry continued in this simple, domestic way for a time, establishing a pattern of service that became the foundation of Gladys's entire future. She learned to speak the language by listening to the mule drivers' stories. She learned the local customs by serving their needs. She gained trust through consistent, humble labor. The Inn of the Eighth Happiness was now established, its lamp burning steadily in the Shanxi night. Gladys Aylward was no longer just a stranded foreigner. She was an essential part of the community, known by the name the local people had bestowed upon her. But the work of an innkeeper was only the first of God's unexpected roles for her. The local magistrate, the Mandarin, a man whose word was law in Yangcheng, was watching her service with a mixture of curiosity and deep suspicion. He did not yet know that this small woman was about to be drawn into the very heart of the province's power structure. Rest now, allowing the rhythmic sound of the distant mule bells to fade into the quiet of your sleep. Gladys has found her footing, her mission is established, and the door to the province is about to be thrown open by a decree she never could have anticipated. Tomorrow, we will see how the quiet missionary earns a title of unexpected authority, becoming a foot inspector and gaining trust on the broken ground of the province. Beneath the shadow of the mountains, the Inn of the Eighth Happiness was never meant to be a quiet place. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged Shanxi peaks, the courtyard would fill with a chorus of sounds: the shuffle of heavy boots, the snorts of weary mules, and the loud, tired voices of men seeking rest. This was Gladys Aylward's congregation, a group of rough, seasoned mule drivers who only cared about comfort, yet stayed night after night to listen to the powerful narratives she wove. Allow the gentle noise of that bustling courtyard to settle in your mind now, the sensory details of a world far away, reduced to the rhythm of arrival and respite. Feel the warmth emanating from the kitchen fire, the smell of savory Chinese food, and the sense of weary relief that comes with reaching shelter after a long day's travel. Gladys and Jeannie Lawson served these men diligently. The mule drivers were the lifeblood of commerce in the mountains, constantly traveling the ancient trade routes that snaked through the province. They carried precious goods, but they also carried stories and news, and they possessed a deep, practical understanding of the land. They were a resistant, yet crucial, audience for the gospel. In the tradition of the Inn of the Eighth Happiness, the two women established a routine that honored the traveler's needs. First came the physical provisions: hot water for washing, feed for the mules, and a simple, nourishing meal. The hospitality was genuine, provided without judgment, a pure expression of God's unconditional love in action. Then, as the lamps were lit and the shadows grew long and still, the storytelling would begin. Gladys and Jeannie Lawson understood that abstract theology meant nothing to these men. What they needed were stories of power, action, and ultimate loyalty, tales that mirrored the drama and danger of their own lives. Imagine the scene: the men seated on wooden benches, perhaps leaning against their packs, their faces flickering in the lantern light. Gladys, gradually mastering the local dialect, would share the simple, profound narratives of the Old and New Testaments. She told them of Abraham, a wanderer who was given a promise too large for his lifetime. The mule drivers understood wandering, and they understood promises that stretched into the unseen future. She told them of Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers, yet ultimately elevated to a position of impossible power. They understood betrayal and the sudden twists of fate on a long road. Most compellingly, she spoke of Jesus Christ, the ultimate traveler who came down from glory to walk the dust of the earth, who carried a burden heavier than any mule could bear, and who offered a rest more profound than any inn could provide. The message was simple: God is the master storyteller, and He is the ultimate destination. The key to the success of this ministry was the simple accuracy and visual power of the biblical narrative. The stories were vivid, easily grasped, and did not require years of theological training to appreciate. They were cinematic in their description: the floodwaters, the fire on Mount Sinai, the star over Bethlehem, the storm on the Sea of Galilee. Gladys allowed the inherent drama and truth of Scripture to do its own work, transforming the inn into an open-air theater of faith. The mule drivers, though often stoic and resistant to change, slowly found themselves drawn into the rhythm of the tales. They respected strength and consistency, and the sheer consistency of Gladys's service and message chipped away at their skepticism. They saw the two women not growing rich, but growing perpetually tired, serving out of pure, deep conviction. Rest in that slow, steady process of faith taking root. It reminds us that God rarely works on the world's fast timeline. He works patiently through repeated acts of kindness and the consistent telling of the truth. One of the beautiful consequences of this ministry was that the mule drivers became unconscious missionaries. As they moved through the distant mountain villages, they would often recount the stories they heard at the Inn of the Eighth Happiness. They would tell tales of Aylward, the virtuous one, and of the powerful, one true God she served. They spread the seed of the gospel far beyond the physical walls of the inn, proving that God can use the most unlikely, itinerant people as His messengers. Their presence also provided Gladys with an essential education. By listening to their dialects and their regional stories, she quickly learned the nuances of the language and the local customs that no textbook could teach. They taught her about the terrain, the people, and the political currents of the region, knowledge that would later prove absolutely vital to her survival. and her expanded ministry. The daily commitment to this hard, thankless work was a powerful testimony to the grace and nature of God. He did not send Gladys Aylward to Yangcheng to live a life of ease. He sent her to labor in humility, to prove that true service is found in meeting the dirtiest, most immediate needs of humanity. Her willingness to scrub floors and serve rough men was the physical evidence of the God who came to serve, not to be served. The story of the inn is a glorification of God's efficiency. He took a small, unskilled woman, placed her in the most strategic location for travel and trade, and gave her the most effective audience for regional outreach. The entire ministry was perfectly designed to maximize impact through minimal resource, demonstrating that divine strategy always surpasses human power. Allow the warmth of the lantern light to quiet your thoughts now. The mule drivers are resting. The stories have been told, and a deep peace settles over the mountain pass. The work of the night is done, and the seed of faith has been scattered along hundreds of miles of trail. Gladys Aylward, the rejected parlor maid, had found her voice and her mission field. The community was beginning to see her not as a stranger, but as Aylward. However, a profound challenge was about to arrive from the highest local authority, threatening to pull her away from the quiet ministry of the inn, yet simultaneously throwing open the doors to the entire Shanxi province. Rest in the satisfaction of a day well served, knowing that God is at work in your most humble routines. Tomorrow, we will see how an unexpected imperial decree transforms the mule driver's helper into a respected officer of the law, gaining trust on broken ground. The local mandarin, a man of profound suspicion and rigid tradition, had long seen Gladys as nothing more than a curious foreigner running a busy, if odd, establishment. His authority was absolute, his gaze watchful. Yet, an imperial decree arrived, sweeping down from the high halls of the provincial government, bringing with it an unexpected, almost miraculous opportunity for Gladys to step out of the inn and into the life of the entire province. Allow the quiet weight of that authority to settle over you now. In that world, the word of the Mandarin was the word of the law, and that power could have easily crushed the small ministry of the inn. But God often uses the very structures of earthly authority to advance his quiet, eternal purposes. The decree concerned a centuries-old practice, foot binding. This tradition involved tightly wrapping the feet of young girls to break the bones and dramatically reshape them, symbolizing feminine status and beauty, but often resulting in crippling pain and lifelong disability. By the 1930s, the practice was considered outdated and barbaric by the central government, and a strong imperial mandate had been issued to abolish it. The problem lay in the enforcement. In the conservative, remote mountain villages of Shanxi, the law was deeply unpopular. It challenged powerful cultural traditions and faced fierce resistance from families who viewed unbound feet as shameful. The Mandarin of Yangcheng needed a person of immense courage, resilience, and unique social standing to travel through the remote villages and convince the families to comply. His own soldiers and officials, being men, could not reasonably deal with the women of the province, and their heavy-handed methods would only provoke revolt. He needed someone who could move between worlds, someone both respected and entirely expendable, someone who feared neither the distance nor the difficulty. In a moment of political necessity and sheer audacity, The Mandarin looked across the social divide and settled upon Gladys Aylward. Imagine the surprise, the astonishment in the village. The foreign woman, the innkeeper, the storyteller, was suddenly elevated to the status of a government official. She was given a new, unique title, Foot Inspector. This was not a title of great military power, but a mandate of moral authority. It meant Gladys could travel freely, request lodging, and most importantly, speak with the women of the household, a privilege almost unheard of for a foreign woman. The Mandarin provided her with an official title, the necessary papers, and a small entourage of soldiers for safety and transport. Gladys accepted the task with the same quiet, radical obedience that had fueled her journey from London. She saw this mission as a profound gift from God, a divine provision that opened every door previously closed to her ministry. She was being paid by the government to do what she had come to China to do: travel, communicate, and relieve suffering. Her journeys began immediately, taking her far from the familiar courtyard of the Inn of the Eighth Happiness and deep into the rural traditional heart of the province. Allow your mind to drift now, imagining her small caravan winding its way through the mountain passes. The rhythmic shuffle of the animals' hooves against the dusty trails becomes a soothing sound, a slow, measured beat against the backdrop of the rugged mountains. This was the true China, a place of profound beauty and deep-rooted tradition. Gladys's method was not one of forced compliance, but of patient persuasion. She would enter a village, often to immediate suspicion and cold silence. She would gather the women, and instead of relying solely on the imperial mandate, she would speak to them as a woman. She would patiently explain the benefits of unbound feet, the ability to walk, to work, to escape danger quickly, and she would offer a small government-provided stipend as compensation for the loss of traditional status. Crucially, she demonstrated a profound respect for their culture and their personhood. She met their resistance with calm understanding and their pain with genuine empathy. She knew that tradition was a heavy weight and that change could only come through trust, not coercion. The title of Foot Inspector gave her access, but her character, the Aylward they already knew, gave her influence. The villagers saw that the woman who was willing to feed their mule drivers and calm their prisons was also the woman who now came to relieve their daughter's pain. This new role became the perfect platform for the gospel. As she patiently unbound the feet of the children and taught the mothers how to wrap them correctly for healing, she told them the stories of the eighth happiness. The physical act of loosening the bonds on the children's feet became a living metaphor for the spiritual freedom offered by Christ. She spoke of a God who sought to set all people free, not just physically, but spiritually. This journey solidified her transformation. She was no longer simply a foreign guest. She was an essential figure of local authority and moral integrity, respected by the Mandarin and welcomed into the homes of the villagers. The authority granted by the government was now being used as a divine instrument for evangelism and humanitarian aid. Rest now, recognizing how God connects your highest calling with your deepest skills. The parlor maid, who understood service and cleaning, was now the inspector who understood cleanliness and care, moving through the countryside with official purpose. The successful implementation of the anti-foot binding campaign executed with such gentle but unwavering persistence, cemented her relationship with the local mandarin. His initial suspicion had given way to deep reliance. He saw that she was effective where his own officials failed, achieving compliance through kindness and integrity rather than brute force. This growing trust would have profound consequences, not just for Gladys, but for the safety of the entire region. The Mandarin now viewed Aylward as more than an eccentric. She was an asset and eventually a friend. The quiet, systematic work of the foot inspector was building a foundation of goodwill that would soon be tested by a great, chaotic event. Her ability to navigate these remote mountain trails, her knowledge of the villages, and the trust she had earned with the common people were all pieces of a divine preparation for the trials ahead. The very act of walking the province and healing its broken ground was training her for a far more desperate journey. The commission of the foot inspector had taken Gladys Aylward out of the inn and integrated her completely into the local fabric of the Shanxi Mountains. But the Mandarin would soon call upon her for a task far exceeding the mandate of imperial law, a moment of true crisis that required an impossible, fearless courage. As you settle towards sleep, feel the quiet triumph of obedience over fear, knowing that God transforms obstacles into opportunities. Tomorrow, we will follow Gladys into the dark stone fortress of the local prison, where an angry riot is threatening to tear the town apart. Peace in the heart of the uproar. The prison was a place of despair, a dark stone fortress where human hope went to die, a grim and heavy shadow on the edge of the quiet mountain town. When a riot erupted, threatening to spill chaos into the streets and consume everything in its path, the Mandarin turned not to his soldiers, but to the small foreign woman whose courage he had reluctantly come to trust. Allow the sudden, discordant noise of that distant chaos to soften now, replaced by the quiet confidence of the one called Aylward. The crisis was immediate, the danger real, and the Mandarin's desperation profound. The prison, a brutal, neglected structure, housed men whose despair had finally erupted into violence. The sounds of shouting, breaking wood, and clanging metal signaled an imminent breach, a threat to the ordered peace of Yangqing. The Mandarin, the highest authority in the region, understood power and fear, but he did not understand peace that transcended both. His soldiers were trained to use force, a response that would only escalate the violence, leading to bloodshed, execution, and deeper resentment among the local people. He was trapped. Force meant massacre. Inaction meant anarchy. It was in this moment of acute crisis that his mind turned with astonishing speed to Gladys Aylward. He had seen her walk into hostile villages and speak gently to resistant women. He had seen her consistently demonstrate an unwavering quiet authority that came not from a uniform, but from an internal source of peace. She was a woman known for her courage and her integrity, the virtuous one. He summoned her immediately. Imagine that scene now. The elderly Mandarin, a symbol of ancient heavy tradition, pleading with the tiny English missionary who stood before him, her hands still perhaps calloused from serving the mule drivers. He laid out the situation, the riot, the danger, the failure of his own methods. He asked her to go in, alone, and attempt to speak to the prisoners. Rest now in the realization that true authority in God's kingdom is often demonstrated not by strength, but by gentle submission to a divine peace. Gladys Aylward knew the spiritual danger of the request, yet she agreed without hesitation. She recognized the opportunity to demonstrate the power of her God in a place where only despair reigned. She walked toward the prison gates with two of the Mandarin's guards, but only one would enter, her. The massive, iron-bound doors groaned open, revealing a chaotic world of smoke, splintered wood, and furious, desperate men. The air was thick with rage and violence. Gladys did not rush. She did not shout. She simply walked in, her small figure standing starkly against the towering stone walls and the chaos swirling around her. Her movement was slow, deliberate, and entirely rhythmic, maintaining the steady pace of the quiet confidence she carried. The noise did not stop immediately, but the sheer audacity of her presence created a momentary, stunned pause. The men, fueled by anger and adrenaline, were brought up short by the sight of this small, unarmed woman. They were ready to fight guards, but they were unprepared to confront Aylward. Gladys began to speak in the local dialect she'd carefully learned from the mule drivers. She spoke not as a jailer or a judge, but as a servant. She addressed their pain, their suffering, and the deep, understandable rage that had erupted from their years of neglect. She did not deny their humanity or the injustice of their situation. She simply acknowledged it. She then spoke of the eighth happiness, the peace that passes all understanding. She reminded them of the God of the Bible, who champions the cause of the oppressed and who calls his people to justice, but also to a quiet strength that does not feed the cycle of violence. The men did not convert instantly, but they did pause. The steady, measured rhythm of her voice, a calm island in the ocean of their rage, began to do its work. It cut through the adrenaline and the chaos, offering a simple, human connection where there had only been stone and iron. She spoke directly to their needs. She promised not immediate release, which was beyond her power, but immediate intervention to improve their physical conditions, better food, warmer blankets, and a chance for honest conversation with the Mandarin about their grievances. She offered practical hope, backed by the integrity the whole town now knew she possessed. This moment was a profound act of spiritual leadership. Gladys Aylward was not using a human weapon. She was using the tool of active, non-aggressive listening, coupled with the authority of the name she had earned, the virtuous one. The prisoners, seeing no threat and hearing genuine empathy, slowly began to lower their makeshift weapons and separate. Imagine the tension gradually dissolving, the loud shouts dropping to murmurs, the frenzy giving way to exhaustion, and a shared curiosity. The noise of the riot faded into the heavy silence of the stone prison walls. Within a short time, the unthinkable happened. The riot stopped. Gladys Aylward walked out, having achieved what the entire garrison of armed soldiers could not. The prisoners had submitted not to fear, but to a moral force they could not comprehend, a peace they desperately needed. The effect of this event on the Mandarin was transformational. His respect for Gladys Aylward ceased to be based on necessity and became based on admiration. He had witnessed a power far greater than his own, a force that quelled violence without creating more victims. He began to treat Gladys not just as a trusted agent, but as a spiritual advisor. He realized that the God she served was a God who brought order out of chaos and peace into violence. This moment sealed her integration into the high places of Shanxi. The Mandarin's protection of her ministry became absolute, and his reliance on her judgment deepened considerably. He understood that this small woman was a profound asset, a source of stability in an increasingly unstable world. Her successful negotiation of the riot opened up conversations about the nature of the Christian God, conversations that would eventually lead to a shift in his own heart. Rest now, knowing that God often places you in the heart of chaos to demonstrate the calm of His presence. The noise of the day's worries may feel like a riot in your own mind, but peace can enter in the form of a quiet, steady resolve. Gladys Aylward's ability to command peace in the prison was the culmination of all her previous quiet acts of obedience: the saving, the traveling, the serving of the mule drivers, and the gentle work of the foot inspector. Her character, forged in humility, was now her greatest weapon. The prison walls held the quiet aftermath of the miracle, and the town rested securely under the watchful eye of a woman whose authority was spiritual, not military. But the world outside Yangcheng was darkening quickly. The storm clouds of a great war were gathering, and the profound peace of this moment would soon be tested by a fear far greater than any prison riot. As you drift towards sleep, know that the God of order is present in your deepest anxieties. Tomorrow, we will see how Gladys Aylward, the woman of peace, becomes the guardian of 100 forgotten children. The price of a soul, even amidst the rigorous work of the inn and the long taxing journeys as a foot inspector, a new, vital calling began to grow. It started small, with a tiny, discarded life, a little boy left abandoned with a handful of meager coins and a future that stretched only as far as the nearest street corner. This act of adoption was not a planned mission. It was the spontaneous, overwhelming response of a heart aligned with the limitless, expansive love of God. Rest now and feel the powerful simplicity of a life interrupted by a tiny, urgent need. The world of Gladys Aylward was already overflowing with work, risk, and service. She was running the inn, advising the Mandarin, and traversing the mountain villages. Yet her capacity for grace was about to stretch far beyond her own strength. The boy was brought to her after being discovered alone in the marketplace. He was small, frail, and bore the heavy marks of neglect. His family, unable to care for him, had left him with a pittance, a small portion of silver, perhaps just enough to purchase a single meal. In that culture, abandonment often meant a slow, lonely death. Gladys looked at the child, then at the handful of coins, and made a decision rooted deep in her personal history. She remembered her own audacious journey from London, funded by her years of diligent, daily saving, the 9 pence a day voyage. That small collection of coins had represented her price of faith, the sacrifice needed to start her life's work. In a powerful, emotional echo of her own beginning, she named the little boy 9 pence. In the local Chinese dialect, he was called Yin, which translated to small portion of silver or 9 pence. This name was profoundly important. It declared that this child, discarded and valued only by a few coins, was now considered a priceless treasure. He was a constant, physical reminder to Gladys and the entire community that God honors the small beginnings and the unexpected gifts. This child was the first fruit of the spiritual harvest that God was establishing through her humble hands. Imagine the atmosphere in the Inn of the Eighth Happiness as 9 pence was taken in. The tough mule drivers, the suspicious neighbors, and the soldiers of her escort all witnessed this radical act of love. In a society where the value of a child was often weighed against the economic ability to feed them, Gladys chose to weigh the boy's soul against the infinite, expansive wealth of God's grace. The act of adopting ninepence was soon followed by others. The news of the virtuous one, who did not turn away the destitute, began to spread through the valleys. Children who were orphaned, lost, or simply abandoned due to the crushing weight of poverty or the mounting instability of the region began to find their way to the inn. The Inn of the Eighth Happiness quickly transformed from a simple roadside haven for mule drivers into an unplanned, burgeoning orphanage. This required a significant adjustment. The routines of the inn, once focused on adult travelers, now had to accommodate the ceaseless, energetic, and financially demanding presence of small children. Gladys, along with the help of a small number of local assistants, took on the roles of mother, teacher, nurse, and provider. Rest in the chaos and the blessing of that growing family. It is a portrait of the sheer, joyful messiness of genuine, unconditional love. The challenges were immense. She constantly needed more food, more space, and more resources to keep the children fed, warm, and safe. The original funding, intended for the upkeep of the missionary and the inn, was now stretched thin, forcing Gladys to rely once again on prayer and miraculous, spontaneous provision. Yet, this ministry of adoption became the most powerful visible evidence of the gospel in Yangqing. It was easy to speak of a loving God, but it was far more compelling to see that love manifested in the life-saving act of giving a discarded child a home, a name, and a hope. The children themselves became the central message. They were living proof of the grace and nature of God, that the overlooked are chosen, the weak are protected, and the forgotten are remembered. They were taught the stories of the Bible, just as the mule drivers were, and they became a living, joyful choir in the mountains, learning to sing hymns and recite scripture. The profound impact of this adoption ministry extended into the community leadership. The Mandarin, who had witnessed Gladys's quiet courage in the prison, now observed her limitless compassion in the home. He saw that she treated these low-caste, abandoned children as if they were royalty, a concept that ran counter to the rigid social structures of the time. This radical compassion deepened his respect, providing him with a profound window into the character of the Christian God, a father who adopts the orphaned into his own family. The Mandarin's intellectual curiosity about Christianity began to transform into a deep, personal interest, fueled by the evidence of transformed lives playing in the courtyard of the inn. The quiet woman of simple faith had built a spiritual sanctuary. She had created an island of safety and warmth against the crushing current of poverty and abandonment that flowed through the region. This home for the unwanted glorified God by embodying his primary attributes: protection, restoration, and unconditional acceptance. Gladys Aylward did not simply minister to the people, she ministered by becoming a mother to them. This hands-on, deeply personal ministry was the fulfillment of her rejection by the mission board, proving that her lack of institutional training was irrelevant when matched with the abundance of her love. God uses the mother's heart, the cook's hand, and the parlor maid's diligence to establish his kingdom. As the years passed, the number of children grew, solidifying Gladys Aylward's position as a permanent, essential figure in the community. She was the one who inspected feet, calmed riots, and now raised the next generation. Rest now, allowing your heart to be warmed by the image of that growing family. The children, safe in their beds, are living testimonies to a profound, simple truth. No life is without value in the eyes of the one true God. The inn of the eighth happiness, with its courtyard full of children, was now a vibrant, spiritual home in the mountains. But this peace, hard won and deeply cherished, was terribly fragile. Far away, the great destructive engine of the Japanese war machine was turning, and the quiet mountain passes of Shanxi were about to become a desperate theater of conflict. As you drift towards sleep, know that the love that takes in one forgotten soul is the same love that will be needed to protect 100 when the terrible storms descend. Tomorrow, we will hear the first whispers of a war that would threaten to consume everything she had built. The seed of trust in high places. Over the years, the relationship between the powerful Mandarin and the tiny English missionary shifted, almost imperceptibly at first, then undeniably. He'd seen her walk into riots, traverse dangerous roads, and care for the unwanted. The evidence of her God, a quiet and persistent force of righteousness and grace, was becoming undeniable to the highest authority in Yangcheng. Allow the quiet weight of influence to rest upon you now, understanding that faithfulness in small things often produces the greatest results in unexpected places. The Mandarin, whose name signified his absolute civil and military power, was a man of ancient tradition, educated in the rigid philosophies of the imperial system. His world was one of hierarchy, order, and strategic control. When Gladys Aylward first arrived, he viewed her with suspicion and mild contempt. Just another outsider attempting to disrupt the stable rhythms of his province. His first engagement with her, appointing her as the foot inspector, was purely pragmatic, a political solution to an unpopular decree. He never intended for the relationship to deepen beyond official necessity, but through the quiet, consistent rhythm of her obedience, Gladys chipped away at his intellectual resistance. First, he witnessed her unflappable courage at the prison riot. He saw his own soldiers fail to quell the uprising, yet this small, unarmed woman walked into the heart of the chaos and brought forth peace. This was an authority he could not purchase, command, or teach. It was an authority that transcended his laws and his armies. Second, he observed her radical compassion in the inn of the eighth happiness. He saw her pouring her life and resources into the care of abandoned children, like the small boy, Ninepence. This act of selfless adoption contrasted sharply with the self-serving political strategies he was accustomed to. He recognized a genuine, restorative love that was absent in his own world of harsh judgment and calculated favor. The Mandarin, being a man of high intelligence, began to investigate the source of this profound difference. He would summon Gladys not just for official business, but for deep, probing conversations about her faith. He asked about the God who became a servant, the God who died for enemies, and the God who promised not earthly power, but eternal rest. Imagine them sitting now, separated by a vast gulf of culture and power, yet united by a deep philosophical quest. Gladys, with a simple, honest language, explained the narrative of God's grace, always pointing back to the character of the amazing God who glorifies himself by choosing the weak and the unlikely. He saw the Christian faith not as a foreign political movement, but as a system that worked. It made the abandoned cared for, the violent peaceful, and the weak courageous rest in the simplicity of this profound realization. It is a reminder that the most effective evangelism is often the simple, verifiable evidence of a transformed life lived in public service. This intellectual curiosity gradually softened into a personal reliance. The Mandarin began to seek Gladys's advice on matters of moral justice and local welfare, trusting her judgment implicitly. He learned that her guidance was always truthful, unbiased, and motivated only by a spiritual desire for righteousness rather than political gain. He used his official power to shield her ministry. When local officials or jealous rivals attempted to impede her work, whether the foot inspectorship or the growing orphanage, the Mandarin would intervene decisively. He had become a silent, powerful guardian of the Aylward and her mission. The pinnacle of this transformation was the Mandarin's personal acknowledgement of the truth of the Christian faith. While the historical records may not detail a traditional, formal conversion in the Western sense, his actions spoke volumes. He publicly aligned himself with her values, endorsed her work, and most importantly, showed a profound reverence for the God she served. This transformation of the highest local official is a powerful testament to the grace and nature of God working in high places. It showed that no heart, regardless of its entrenched power or tradition, is too hard for the quiet persistence of the gospel to penetrate. God used a series of small, daily acts: a riot quelled, a foot unbound, a child adopted, to draw this powerful man toward the truth. The Mandarin became, in effect, a patron of the faith, ensuring that the inn of the eighth happiness and the work of Gladys Aylward were secured under his protection. This was divine provision on a political scale, ensuring the stability needed for the orphanage to grow. The entire village watched this unlikely friendship blossom. They saw their highest human authority treating the foreign missionary with deep, unreserved respect. This provided a compelling public validation of Gladys's character and, by extension, the faith she represented. The seed of trust had been planted in high places, ready to bear fruit. Rest now in the quiet miracle of that softened heart. Know that God is not limited by earthly rank or authority. He can use the highest official and the humblest maid to accomplish His will. This era of stability, however, was about to end. The quiet, protective shadow of the Mandarin was about to face a far darker, wider shadow. As Gladys was securing her work with the Mandarin, the vast, distant conflict of the Sino-Japanese War was drawing closer, threatening to shatter the fragile peace of the Shanxi Mountains and test the Mandarin's loyalty in a way that neither of them could have foreseen. The trust that Gladys had so diligently earned in times of peace would soon be vital for survival in a time of war. The Mandarin's protection would become the children's only hope. As you drift towards sleep, let the image of that powerful official, listening to the simple stories of the gospel, remind you that no one is beyond the reach of God's quiet, persistent influence. Tomorrow, we will hear the first terrifying whispers of the coming war, forcing Gladys to confront the possibility of abandoning everything she had built. Whispers on the Silk Road. The mountain air had always been crisp and clear, providing a clean, quiet refuge high above the noise of the world. But by the late 1930s, that purity was beginning to mix with a sound Gladys Aylward had never wanted to hear: the distant, steady drumming of war. The Japanese invasion was not a story in a faraway newspaper. It was a creeping threat that forced her to confront the possibility of abandoning everything she had so diligently built. Rest now and feel the unsettling transition from hard-won peace to impending conflict. The years spent serving the mule drivers, calming the prison, and raising the children had been dedicated to building a sanctuary. Now, the shadow of destruction stretched long and cold over the Shanxi peaks. The Second Sino-Japanese War had begun to rage in the coastal cities, a conflict of devastating scale and brutality. For a long time, the remote mountain province of Shanxi felt safe, buffered by the sheer distance and rugged terrain. But the Japanese advance was methodical, pushing inland, occupying town after town, and bringing with it a profound terror. The mule drivers, who had once carried tales of the eighth happiness, now carried whispers of violence and destruction. They spoke of air raids, the burning of villages, and the systematic targeting of foreign nationals and local Chinese resistance. The rhythmic clack-clack of their mules was now punctuated by anxiety as they asked Aylward what they should do. Gladys, the woman who'd always relied on quiet faith, now had to rely on practical courage. Her primary concern was not her own safety, but the protection of the growing number of children in her care. A family that had swelled to many dozen souls. Every life had been individually entrusted to her, and the thought of them falling into the path of the approaching armies was unbearable. The threat was amplified by Gladys's unique status. Her work as the foot inspector, sanctioned by the Chinese government, made her a known figure to the Japanese. They saw her not just as a missionary, but as an anti-Japanese agent, a foreigner who'd actively worked to enforce Chinese imperial law and, crucially, had deep knowledge of the mountain routes and local loyalties. She became a specific target. Imagine the tension in the Inn of the Eighth Happiness. The courtyard that was once filled with joyful, chaotic play now held a heavy silence. Gladys began to prepare. She taught the children simple survival skills: where to hide, how to remain quiet during the day, and how to look for the signs of danger. The lessons of scripture, of seeking refuge, of the Lord as a shield, were given new, immediate urgency. This period was a continuous, agonizing exercise in discernment and prayer. Should she trust the local mountain fortress for protection? Should she wait, hoping the tide of war would turn? Or must she abandon the life she built, putting all her trust in God for a journey of escape? The Mandarin, her political and spiritual friend, was in a crisis himself. His duty was to the province, but he knew his armies were outmatched. He knew the danger Gladys was in. His protection, once absolute, was now diminishing under the overwhelming threat of the invaders. He urged her to find a safe haven deep in the Chinese interior. The sound of the war grew closer. One evening, a Japanese air raid struck a nearby town, a terrifying demonstration of their reach. The noise of the explosions, the distant smoke, and the immediate panic of the townspeople broke the illusion of safety forever. The Inn of the Eighth Happiness was now on the front line. Gladys made the difficult, agonizing decision: they must evacuate. The mission was no longer about keeping the inn open. It was about preserving the lives entrusted to her care. The final push of the Japanese army into the province was imminent, and she knew the window of opportunity for escape was closing rapidly. Her life's work, the physical structure of the inn, the carefully cultivated goodwill all had to be sacrificed for the higher spiritual priority of life and safety. It was a profound act of letting go, surrendering everything material to the will of an amazing God who values the soul above all earthly possessions. The planning was meticulous and quiet. The chosen destination was Fusing, a safe, remote location deep in the west of China, where a larger, established mission compound offered security and resources. But Fusing was more than 200 miles away, across some of the most unforgiving mountain terrain in the province. The journey was not just long, it was treacherous. It involved climbing sheer mountain faces, navigating dangerous river crossings, and, most critically, avoiding Japanese patrol routes that crisscrossed the main roads. She faced the logistical nightmare of moving dozens of small, frightened, and often sickly children, many of whom were too young to understand the magnitude of the danger. Rest now and contemplate the depth of that commitment. It is the purest form of pastoral love, to lead the flock out of harm's way, regardless of the personal cost. The final days in Yangqing was spent gathering meager supplies, simple food, warm clothing, and the essential tools of navigation and first aid. She looked at the faces of her children, her adopted sons and daughters, and drew strength from their simple faith. They had learned to trust Aylward in the quiet of the inn, and now they would trust her in the chaos of the road. The presence of the Mandarin provided a final, crucial act of grace. He used his remaining influence to secure a preliminary passage for the group, quietly setting the stage for their departure. His parting was a poignant moment, a quiet farewell to the woman who had shown him the true face of faith and justice. The great exodus was set. Gladys Aylward, the unsuitable parlor maid, was about to lead an unsuitable army of children across a war-torn continent. She was exchanging the steady rhythm of domestic service for the frantic pace of a desperate, long walk. As you settle towards sleep, feel the quiet determination of that final night in the Inn of the Eighth Happiness. The lantern light is dim, the children are resting fitfully, and the air holds the terrifying stillness before a great storm. Gladys Aylward closes the door on the only sanctuary she has known in China, knowing that God's faithfulness is not contained within walls, but demonstrated upon the road. Tomorrow, we will begin the long march across the mountains, following the footsteps of 100 souls toward an uncertain, distant, safe harbor. The march of 100 souls. The morning was hushed, broken only by the nervous shuffling of tiny feet. 100 children, led by a single, small woman, began the most famous journey of faith in the 20th century. Ahead lay massive mountain ranges, hostile patrol routes, and a destination more than 200 miles away. But behind them lay certain destruction. Allow the quiet, deliberate sound of those footsteps to soothe your mind now. A small, steady rhythm against the vast silence of the Shanxi Mountains. This was not a march of armies, but a pilgrimage of innocence, fueled by the faith of Aylward, the virtuous one. The decision to leave the Inn of the Eighth Happiness was not one of panic, but of calculated, desperate necessity. The Japanese army had advanced deep into the province, making Yangqing a target. Gladys knew the children, most of whom were orphans or from impoverished families, had no chance if they were discovered by the invaders. The goal was Fusing, a safe inland city far to the west, where a larger, secure mission was established. The distance was approximately 250 miles, a journey that would take a seasoned traveler many days. For a group of 100 children, many of whom were still very young, some barely old enough to walk, it was an almost impossible challenge. Gladys organized the children with the utmost care, instilling the need for absolute silence and obedience. She taught them to walk in a loose yet disciplined chain, moving quickly where they could and hiding completely when the distant sound of engines or voices indicated danger. She secured the most meager of provisions: dried grain, a little water, and simple, thin blankets for the cold nights. The path she chose was not the main road, but the ancient mountain trails she had come to know intimately during her years as the foot inspector. These routes, though treacherous, were less patrolled and offered natural cover among the rocks and ravines. Every step was a reliance on the geographical knowledge she had accumulated through her diligent, humble service. Imagine the logistical challenge of this march. 100 different sets of fear, exhaustion, and hunger, all resting upon the shoulders of one woman. She had to manage the pace, ensure the provisions stretched, attend to the inevitable injuries, scraped knees, exhaustion, and dehydration, and above all, maintain the spiritual morale of the group. The rhythm of the journey became a prayer in action. When a child stumbled, Gladys would stop, lifting the child onto her back or delegating the task to one of the older children. When fear flared, she would not shout orders, she would tell stories. She returned to the most powerful, simple narratives from the Inn of the Eighth Happiness. She told them the story of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea and the manna in the wilderness. She spoke of the God who'd always provided a way where there was no way, and who sustained his people in the desert. The biblical narrative was no longer a bedtime story. It was an immediate, practical promise of survival. Rest now and feel the gentle, lulling power of those stories being told amidst the sound of marching feet. It is a profound example of how faith becomes the most practical tool for survival. The terrain itself was a constant, grueling obstacle. The Shanxi Mountains are harsh, marked by steep inclines and sharp rock falls. They walked through dry ravines during the heat of the day, seeking any small patch of shade, and then navigated the cold, dizzying heights at night. The children's thin shoes were quickly worn through, leaving their small feet bare and bleeding. Gladys had to be constantly vigilant, her eyes scanning the horizon for the slightest sign of Japanese patrols or local bandits. She understood that one loud cry, one wrong turn, or one hostile encounter could mean the end for the entire group. This immense responsibility demanded a strength that was purely supernatural. The daily process of putting one foot in front of the other became a testament to God's sustaining strength in weariness. They averaged perhaps 20 miles a day, a monumental feat considering the age of the children and the roughness of the road. There were moments of doubt, of tears, and of deep physical exhaustion, both for the children and for Gladys herself. In those moments of profound struggle, she would stop the entire group, not just to rest, but to pray. She would ask the children to recite a specific scripture or sing a simple hymn. This act was not a distraction. It was a re-anchoring of their dependence. It reminded them that their strength did not come from their tired legs, but from the amazing God who was their ultimate protector. One particularly terrifying episode occurred when they had to cross a main road known to be heavily patrolled. They waited for hours, hidden among the rocks, the children pressed against her, their fear a palpable, silent weight. Only when the road was completely clear, confirmed by the silence of the wind, did they break cover, rushing across the asphalt and back into the safety of the wilderness paths. The tension of those few moments captured the constant, low-grade fear under which they lived. This long walk stripped Gladys Aylward of any remaining dependence on the world's resources. The money was nearly gone. The supplies were rationed down to the barest minimum. All that remained was her faith and the sheer physical determination to protect the lives entrusted to her. She had become completely and utterly God-dependent. Rest now in the simple courage of that forward motion. Allow the rhythm of the march to become the rhythm of your own breath, deliberate and steady. She led them, not with shouts of urgency, but with the calm, measured pace of a guide who knows the path and knows the ultimate source of strength. The cinematic quality of this march lies not in high-speed action, but in the epic scale of the mountains, contrasted with the heroic vulnerability of the children. It is a visual story of David and Goliath, repeated 100 times over. The children, in turn, were transformed by the journey. They learned resilience, selflessness, and mutual aid. The older ones protected the younger, sharing the last drops of water and the last crumbs of dried grain. The disparate group of orphans and abandoned children forged themselves into a true family, bound by shared hardship and singular faith. The first few days had passed, successfully putting a considerable distance between them and the immediate danger of Yangcheng. But the next great challenge loomed ahead: the lack of provisions and the impossibility of finding food in the desolate, war-scarred mountains. Their faith would soon be tested not by fear of the enemy, but by the relentless, gnawing reality of hunger. As you settle towards sleep, feel the quiet determination of those small, marching feet. Gladys Aylward was leading them not just to a city, but into a direct, profound reliance on the provision of an amazing God. Tomorrow, we will see how the promise of daily bread is fulfilled in the most unexpected places in the desolate wilderness. The hidden meal in the high places. Day after day, the provisions dwindled. The meager rations of dried grain and boiled water, stretched thin among 100 mouths, were nearly exhausted. The missionary faced the raw, fearful question every leader must ask in the wilderness: how will I feed them tomorrow? In the desolate mountains, where there was nothing but rock and sky, God's answer came in the most unexpected form. Rest now, allowing the gnawing anxiety of scarcity to soften into the quiet certainty of provision. The march of 100 souls had successfully evaded the Japanese patrols, covering difficult ground, but the relentless physical demands of the journey had exposed the greatest vulnerability: the lack of food. This was a challenge that no amount of courage or knowledge of the trails could overcome alone. The mountain paths, though offering protection from the war, offered nothing in the way of sustenance. The fields were barren or long since harvested, and the few villages they skirted were themselves struggling under the pressure of the conflict. Gladys Aylward's heart was heavy with the burden of her responsibility. Her faith was not theoretical. It was the practical belief that the God who called her would also feed the 100 children she was protecting. Imagine her counting the remaining rations at dusk, the fading light illuminating the small, disappointing pile of grain. The children were quiet, their exhaustion masking the hunger. But Gladys saw the weariness in their eyes and the fragility of their small frames. She knew that without intervention, the march would soon turn into a tragic collapse. In that moment of profound human inadequacy, Gladys made a decision rooted in her deepest spiritual conviction. She gathered the children, not for a frantic search, but for a moment of complete spiritual dependence. She asked them to pray, to speak simply and directly to the God of the Bible, the one who had sustained his people in the desert. She reminded them of the story of the 5 loaves and 2 fish, the moment where human resourcefulness failed and divine abundance took over. She taught them that when the need is greatest, the heart must turn from worry to worship, from searching to simply asking. Rest now and feel the quiet power of that collective prayer. 100 small voices lifted in simple, unified petition in the vast, empty wilderness. The provision did not come instantly, with a miraculous basket of food descending from the sky. Instead, it came through the orchestrated grace of human instruments. On one occasion, while leading the group through a particularly desolate and rocky pass, they encountered a solitary figure on the trail, a farmer traveling with a small, heavily loaded mule. The man was astonished to see the procession of children and the small foreign woman leading them. Gladys approached him, not with a demand, but with a simple statement of their need. She explained their mission, their flight from the war, and the fact that they were completely without food. The farmer, witnessing the sheer scale of the group and the honesty in Gladys's eyes, was moved by a profound sense of compassion. He revealed that he was carrying a shipment of grain intended for a distant market. He knew the risk of stopping, the risk of giving away his precious cargo. Yet, he made an astonishing choice. He unburdened his mule and donated a substantial portion of his grain to the desperate group. He did not ask for payment. He simply looked at the children and acted out of selfless generosity. This was a miracle of the heart, a demonstration that God uses the compassion of strangers to fulfill the promise of daily bread. It was enough food to sustain the group for several crucial days, buying Gladys time to plan the next stage of their provision. Imagine the simple, profound joy of that meal, the quiet gratitude as the children ate the warm grain, their small bellies finally full. It was a tangible, verifiable answer to their prayers. On another day, when the supplies had again run dangerously low, they arrived at a deserted temple complex high in the mountains. The area had been abandoned due to the war, but when Gladys inspected the grounds, she found an unexpected treasure, a forgotten storehouse containing dried sweet potatoes and pulses, enough to stave off starvation. The timing was too precise, the discovery too convenient, to be dismissed as mere chance. This event was a reminder that God often prepares the path before we even walk it. The storehouse had been secured, perhaps months before, by someone they would never know, only to be preserved for their specific moment of need. It was a grace provided through the foresight of the unseen hand. These moments of provision were not a luxury. They were the absolute margin between life and death. They provided the necessary calories and the crucial psychological boost to keep the weary travelers moving. Each hidden meal, each unexpected gift, solidified the children's faith and Gladys's own reliance on the amazing God. The continuous nature of this provision demonstrated a crucial spiritual principle. God's faithfulness is incremental and immediate. He did not give them a year's supply. He gave them just enough for the next few days. This forced them to live in a constant rhythm of day-to-day dependence, never taking the provision for granted, always praying for the next meal. Rest now in the comfort of that pattern, releasing the need to control the future and resting instead in the assurance of daily care. The journey continued, marked by this recurring theme of desperate need, met by immediate supernatural grace. The mule drivers who had been her first audience had taught Gladys the land. The Mandarin had given her authority, and now the farmers and the forgotten storehouses were providing her with sustenance. Every person and every detail of her past ministry was being leveraged by God for the saving of these 100 souls. The success of the march to this point was a monumental illustration of faith in action, glorifying God by showing His presence in the bleakest of circumstances. She was leading them through the wilderness, but they were never truly alone. The God of order, who calms prison riots, was now the God of provision, who stocks forgotten storehouses. The physical exhaustion was still immense, the mental strain relentless, but the certainty of God's provision was their steady anchor. They had survived hunger and they had survived fear, but one final vast obstacle remained, one that was far greater than the hunger or the terrain. It was a challenge of such scale that it threatened to halt the entire journey. The mighty Yellow River, swollen and unpredictable, lay directly in their path, representing the final, insurmountable barrier to their sanctuary. As you drift towards sleep, be comforted by the knowledge that the God who sees your quiet needs is the God who moves mountains and softens the hearts of strangers. Tomorrow, we will join Gladys and the children as they face the most daunting physical challenge of their entire escape, the powerful, final current that stood between them and safety. The final unstoppable current, after days of climbing and descending, of hunger averted by timely grace, they reached the ultimate natural barrier, a vast, unforgiving river, swollen by the recent mountain rains. The currents were too swift, the children too many, and the fear was a tangible weight in the humid air. All the miles walked now depended on this one, final, impossible crossing. Allow the sight of that wide, churning water to settle your mind now. The river was a tributary of the great Yellow River, known in that season for its power and its unpredictable surge. For Gladys Aylward and the 100 children, this water represented the final, formidable test of their faith and endurance. They had successfully navigated the dangers of men and the scarcity of the mountains, but they were now faced with a force of nature that neither courage nor prayer seemed able to subdue. The sight of the river was daunting. The water was a muddy brown, rushing past with a speed that suggested massive, unseen power beneath the surface. There were no established bridges in this remote, war-torn area, and the few ferries that typically operated had long since ceased running. Due to the conflict and the high water levels, the riverbank was soft and unstable, offering no easy vantage point or crossing place. Imagine the 100 small figures huddled on the bank, their weariness forgotten for a moment, replaced by a deep, collective dread. They had walked more than 200 miles. They had endured fear and hunger. To be stopped here, so close to the sanctuary of Fusing, by a body of water, was a profound spiritual and physical defeat. Gladys knew that attempting to swim was unthinkable. The current would sweep away the small, exhausted children instantly. They could not wait indefinitely. The Japanese patrols were closing in, and their meager food supply would not last another full day of waiting. She retreated, as was her habit, to the quiet anchor of her faith. She sat with the children and spoke, not in a voice of panic, but in the calm, measured tone of a guide whose ultimate trust lies outside this world. She told them the stories they knew by heart, the ultimate story of provision. She spoke of the faith that is made perfect in weakness. She called the children to pray again, to ask the God who had opened the sea for Moses to provide a means to cross this final, dangerous current. The simple, rhythmic sound of their praying, their pleas for divine assistance, was the only sound that challenged the roar of the water. Rest now and feel the tension of that desperate, quiet prayer. It is in the moments when human effort is exhausted that the stage is set for a miracle, not necessarily a grand, supernatural spectacle, but a profound, timely intervention orchestrated by an amazing God. The answer to their prayer came not in the parting of the waters, but through the human instrument of timely grace. As the light began to fade and the group settled into the cold certainty of another night spent on the riverbank, a sound emerged from the distance, not the roar of the water, but the rhythmic chug of an engine. Suddenly, around a bend in the river, a small, sturdy ferryboat appeared. It was operated by a man, perhaps a local official or a resourceful boatman, who had risked the dangerous currents to continue his transport work. He was heading in the opposite direction, toward the more populated shore. Gladys ran toward the bank, waving her arms, her heart pounding with a desperate hope. The boatman, seeing the mass of children and the frantic foreign woman, slowed his craft. Gladys quickly and clearly explained their situation: the war, the children, the distant safety, and their complete inability to pay. The boatman, like the mandarin and the farmer before him, was faced with an immediate moral decision. The water was dangerous. The load was massive. The profit was non-existent. Yet, once again, the unflappable integrity of Aylward and the sheer, compelling sight of the 100 innocent lives moved a human heart to extraordinary compassion. The boatman agreed to take them. Imagine the organized chaos of the loading. Gladys and the older children worked quickly, efficiently, and silently, organizing the 100 souls onto the small ferry. The process had to be done in several crossings, each trip a terrifying slow negotiation with the powerful current. The danger of the crossing was acute. The boat pitched and swayed violently, the muddy water swirling close to the low deck. Every child, every crossing, was a profound act of faith, trusting the skill of the boatman and the protective hand of God over the relentless power of the river. In that small, wooden boat, tossed by the current, the children were living out the faith they had been taught. They were literally being carried by the grace of God, delivered from the final, physical barrier. The water that could have drowned them was now the pathway to their salvation. Rest now and feel the rhythmic rocking of the boat, the low drone of the engine, the steady, forward movement toward the far bank. The successful crossing of the river was the climax of their physical journey. It was a profound illustration of how God provides miraculous access in the face of impossible barriers. He did not eliminate the danger, but he provided the means, a simple wooden ferry and the compassion of a stranger to traverse it safely. It was a tangible, undeniable answer to their prayer. When the last of the children stepped onto the far bank, the relief was profound. They had crossed the river that defined the boundary of their physical trial. The distance to Fusing was now manageable. The danger of being immediately overtaken by the Japanese forces significantly diminished. Gladys Aylward, the woman who had walked across a continent, had led her children across a final, powerful current. She was exhausted, drained of every ounce of physical and mental strength, but they were safe. The children, witnessing the final miracle of the journey, were filled with a deep, silent gratitude. The mission was almost complete. The children were on the right side of the river, far from the war zone, but the sheer, accumulated stress of the past weeks, the constant vigilance, the hunger, the fear, and the physical exertion had taken a devastating toll on the small, determined leader. As you settle towards sleep, be comforted by the knowledge that God provides the ferry when the river is uncrossable. The final barrier has been overcome, and the 100 souls are now safe. Gladys Aylward had brought her family out of danger, but the moment the burden of their safety was lifted, the incredible exhaustion of the journey would claim her. Tomorrow, we will see the quiet, desperate moment when the great missionary collapses, and how God provides healing and rest to his wearied servant. The gentle collapse and the healing hand, they had arrived. The children were safe, sheltered, and finally fed. Only when the 100 souls were tucked into the sanctuary of the mission compound did the incredible stress and sheer exhaustion of the last 2 weeks catch up to Gladys Aylward, leading to a profound physical and mental collapse. Allow the immense weight of that relief to settle over your heart now. The quiet triumph that follows a desperate struggle. The 250-mile march across the mountains was complete. The final, dangerous crossing of the Yellow River tributary was behind them. The children were gathered into the safety of the Fusing mission compound, their hunger quenched, their fevered brows cooled, their feet finally at rest. Gladys Aylward did not simply arrive, she delivered them. She had been the engine, the map, the food source, and the spiritual anchor for the entire impossible journey. Her will had superseded her body's limits, fueled by the singular, divine purpose of protecting the lives entrusted to her. She had operated on a strength that was purely supernatural, borrowed moment by moment from the God she served. But the moment the mission was successfully completed, the supernatural strength receded, and the profound cost of the journey came due. Imagine the scene. The quiet, steady bustle of the mission staff taking charge of the children, washing their feet, distributing clean clothing, and preparing hot, nourishing food. Gladys, seeing her children safe, felt the tension that had held her together for a fortnight suddenly snap. The incredible physical and mental strain of those 12 grueling days descended upon her like a heavy, suffocating cloak. She collapsed into a deep fever, a high temperature raging through her body. Her mind, no longer focused on immediate survival, retreated into the fog of delirium. She was exhausted, malnourished, and profoundly ill. The body that had faithfully carried her across a continent and shielded 100 children now demanded a forced, absolute rest. Rest now and feel the quiet insistence of that rest. It is a powerful reminder that even the most dedicated service is a human effort that requires divine recovery. God does not demand perpetual striving. He requires honest dependence which includes the need for deep, healing sleep. For a time, her condition was dire. The mission doctors and nurses worked diligently to combat the high fever and the underlying exhaustion. The prayers of the entire compound, including the 100 children she had rescued, rose around her like a shield. The woman who had embodied strength now had to learn to embody vulnerability, accepting care from others, just as she had tirelessly given it. This chapter is a profound testament to the grace of God in healing and restoration. It shows us that even the greatest heroes of the faith are fragile, human vessels. Gladys Aylward's collapse was not a failure of faith, but the natural consequence of her immense effort, and it provided a beautiful opportunity for God to demonstrate His nurture. The focus shifted from the external act of doing to the internal act of receiving. She had to let go of control, surrendering her life completely to the care of the medical staff and the will of the amazing God she knew. Think of the contrast. For 2 weeks, she had led a desperate march, navigating hostile armies and swift rivers. Now, her battlefield was a silent bed, and her fight was against the fever that consumed her. It was a fight that required only surrender, not strength. The children she had rescued became her quiet nurses and devoted supplicants. They sat near her bedside, whispering prayers and simple songs, reminding the unconscious Aylward of the hope she had instilled in them. Their physical safety, her ultimate goal, was now the source of her spiritual comfort. They were living, breathing evidence that her sacrifice had mattered. The period of recovery was slow, deliberate, and entirely necessary. It was a forced Sabbath, a mandated time of rest that allowed her mind and body to knit back together. In the quiet hours, as the fever gradually broke, her focus began to return. She was restored, not only physically, but spiritually, grounded once again in the reality of God's complete care. Rest now in that gentle process of renewal. The rhythmic, steady beat of your own heart is a reminder that healing is a process of deep, internal work, often accomplished in silence and stillness. The illness allowed her to witness the fruit of her labor through the eyes of others. She saw the safe, happy chaos of her children in the mission courtyard, thriving in their new sanctuary. She saw the efficiency and dedication of the mission staff who had accepted the children without complaint, recognizing the profound spiritual victory they represented. She also learned a deeper lesson in community and interconnectedness. The entire journey, from the 9-pence savings to the ferry crossing, had never been a solo effort. It required the kindness of strangers, the obedience of the boatman, the protection of the Mandarin, and now the care of the Fusing community. This final, forced rest underscored the truth that no servant of God is meant to bear the burden entirely alone. As her strength slowly returned, the memories of the march became less about fear and more about God's perfect sovereignty. Every single obstacle, the cold railway, the anti-foot binding campaign, the prison riot, the war, the mountains, the hunger, the river, had been used as a precise, necessary step in the ultimate divine plan to deliver 100 souls to safety. Gladys Aylward recovered. She rose from her sickbed, weaker but profoundly renewed. The parlor maid, who had marched across a continent, had successfully completed the most dangerous chapter of her life. She was ready to face the future, a future that lay not in the familiar Shanxi mountains, but in a new, unknown land. The war had forever changed the map of China, and the course of her ministry She could not return to Yangcheng. The inn of the eighth happiness was lost to the conflict. Her service to God, however, was far from over. A new calling awaited her across the sea, a final, enduring sanctuary to be built in honor of the name she had earned. As you drift towards sleep, be comforted by the knowledge that God is the great restorer. He provides healing for your hurts and rest for your exhausted mind and body. The legacy of the small woman, the mainland of China, the land she had adopted as her own, was now a sealed memory. But the call that had pulled a parlour maid from London had never been tied to a single province or political border. It was a call to the Chinese people, and on the island of Formosa, now known as Taiwan, there were countless souls adrift. For Gladys Aylward, this new shore was not a place of retirement or ending. It was simply the next step, a new sanctuary to be built, a fresh testament to the enduring, unwavering provision of God. The work of Aylward, the virtuous one, was far from over. She arrived in 1957, a woman now in her mid-50s, carrying nothing but her reputation and that same relentless faith. The island was bustling, a place of refuge and rebuilding, but it was also a place where the old pains of poverty and abandonment were deeply etched. Children still wandered the streets, unloved and unclaimed. The need was as great as it had been in the mountains of Shanxi. And so, with the same quiet determination that had once saved ninepence at a time, Gladys set about her work. She founded a new home, one that would bear her name, the Gladys Aylward Orphanage. It was a humble beginning, a small rented building, but it was anchored by the same giant-sized faith. The children who came to her in Taiwan were different from the mule drivers' sons and daughters in Yangcheng. Many were the children of refugees, some were orphans of circumstance, others were simply left because their families could not feed them. But to Gladys, they were all the same. They were precious, individual souls, each one a divine assignment. She learned their names, their fears, and their small, fledgling dreams. The work was not easier with age. Her body ached from the decades of hard travel, the severe beating she had endured during the war, and the sheer exhaustion of the march over the mountains. Yet, her spirit remained undiminished. There was a profound simplicity to her life there. She rejected the fanfare that was beginning to grow around her name in the West. Her days were spent in the practical, humble tasks of motherhood. She scrubbed floors, cooked vast pots of rice, and told the same timeless Bible stories she had told in the courtyard of the inn. She was, once again, simply a servant, creating a space of warmth and safety. This was not a grand strategic mission by human standards. It was the daily, repetitive, beautiful work of obedience. It was God, once more, demonstrating his power not through thunder or armies, but through the patient hands of a single devoted woman. The orphanage was a place of healing. She took in children who had seen too much, who had learned to trust no one. There was one small boy found wandering near the docks who had not spoken a word in months. The authorities saw him as a lost cause, hardened by trauma. Gladys saw only a child in need of steadfast love. She sat with him day after day, not demanding words, but simply offering presence. She would sing to him quiet hymns from her own childhood, her voice a steady, calm rhythm in his world of chaos. And slowly, like a seed buried in hard soil, he began to respond. It started with a flicker of the eyes, then a small inclination of the head. Weeks later, he finally spoke. His first word, a quiet question about the stories of Jesus she told. This was the miracle of the Taiwan orphanage, repeated time and again, the restoration of a soul, the slow, patient unwrapping of a life that the world had discarded. God's provision remained her only budget. Just as she had trusted him for the 9 pence a day ticket, she trusted him for the daily rice for 100 new mouths. And he proved himself faithful. When the orphanage was low on food, a local shopkeeper would unexpectedly arrive with a donation of vegetables. When a typhoon threatened the integrity of their aging roof, a group of local Christians, strangers to her, would appear to help with repairs. She had learned long ago in the frozen wastes of Siberia that God's economy operated on a different set of principles. Her only job was to identify the need and begin the work. His job was to provide the resources. It was a partnership that had never failed her. Her Chinese name, Aylward, was known across the island. The local government, initially wary of this foreign woman, came to respect her deeply. They saw the tangible results of her love. They saw children who were once destitute and ill, now thriving, educated, and filled with a sense of purpose. She was a living demonstration of the gospel she preached. She did not just speak of God's love, she was the instrument of it. She became a beloved, if slightly eccentric figure, known for her simple, blue Chinese-style clothing and her direct, uncompromising faith. She advocated for the children with a fierce passion, navigating bureaucracy with the same tenacity that had once calmed a prison riot. In this final chapter of her active ministry, the pace was different. The wild dangers of the Shanxi Mountains were replaced by the persistent, grinding challenges of managing a growing institution. But the spiritual principle was identical. It was a life poured out, a complete reliance on God's moment-by-moment guidance. The Taiwan orphanage was not a postscript to her life. It was the culmination of it. It was the proof that her faith was not a product of youthful zeal or dramatic circumstance. It was a lifelong, practiced, and perfected reliance on the God who'd called her. She had built a sanctuary, not just of wood and tile, but of love and security. A final, beautiful inn for the smallest and most vulnerable travelers on the island. This was a life far from the spotlight, lived in the quiet corners of need. She sought no platform and built no empire. She simply gathered the lost, one by one. The children were her legacy, her letters of recommendation, each one a testament to a God who sees the unseen and values the discarded. The world was beginning to learn her name, but in Taiwan, she was known simply as Aylward, the woman who loved children, the one who showed them the goodness of her God. The sounds of the orphanage were the hymns of her final years, the laughter of children playing, the quiet murmur of evening prayers, the rhythm of a life lived in complete, trusting service. She had found her sixth happiness, the true one, not in a place, but in a person. It was the joy of a life lived in total alignment with the will of her Father. And on that island, her work continued, a steady, burning flame of compassion, a final testament to an extraordinary, ordinary life of faith. A new sanctuary for the virtuous one. Far away from the daily routines of the Taiwan orphanage, in the bustling, noisy world of the West, a new sound was beginning to rise. It was the sound of Gladys Aylward's own story, traveling back across the oceans she had crossed so long ago. A life lived in the remote, dust-filled mountains of China was about to be told to millions. This humble parlor maid, who had been rejected as unsuitable for missionary work, was about to become one of the most famous women in the world. God, it seemed, was preparing to amplify the whisper of her obedience into a global proclamation. It began with a man named Alan Burgess, an author who heard whispers of her incredible journey. He sought her out, piecing together the details of her life: the train journey, the inn, the foot inspections, and the impossible march of 100 children over the mountains. In 1957, he published her biography, calling it The Small Woman. The title was perfect. It captured the physical truth of her stature, while contrasting it with the immense scale of her faith and courage. The book was a stunning success. It opened a window for a post-war world into a kind of faith many had never seen: raw, dangerous, and utterly dependent on God. The story was too compelling, too visual, to remain only in print. The rights were purchased for a major motion picture. In 1958, 20th Century Fox released The Inn of the Sixth Happiness, a grand cinematic retelling of her life. The film was a blockbuster, and the role of Gladys Aylward was played by one of Hollywood's brightest stars, Ingrid Bergman. Suddenly, the quiet, determined Ai Weiwei was known in households from America to Europe. The film transported audiences to the mountains of Shanxi, capturing the danger of the war, the authority of the Mandarin, and the breathtaking drama of the journey with the children. The film, however, was a Hollywood production. It took liberties with the truth, as films often do. It simplified complex events, and, most famously, it invented a romantic subplot for Gladys. This particular invention was a source of great personal frustration for her. She had lived her life in singular devotion to God. Her calling had been her one and only companion. She famously remarked that she had never had a romantic interest, and the film's portrayal felt like a distortion of her true motivation. She worried that it diluted the central message of her life, that God, and God alone, was enough. Her journey was not fueled by human romance, but by a divine calling. Yet, God has a way of using all things, even the imperfections of a Hollywood script. While Gladys may have disliked the fictional elements, the film did something miraculous. It broadcast the core of her testimony: faith, courage, and God's miraculous provision to a generation. Millions who would never read a missionary biography sat in darkened theaters and watched a story of profound Christian faith. They saw a woman who, against all odds, trusted God and rescued children. The film's title, The Inn of the Sixth Happiness, became a household phrase, a symbol of hope and sanctuary. The movie may have been imperfect, but its impact was undeniable. It planted a seed of inspiration, showing the world what one person, partnered with God, could do. Gladys herself became a reluctant celebrity. She was invited to speak at churches and conferences around the world. People flocked to see the small woman in person. They came expecting the glamorous hero played by Ingrid Bergman. They found, instead, a small, plainly dressed, aging woman with a simple, powerful message. She spoke with a direct, unpolished honesty. She talked not of her own heroism, but of God's unwavering faithfulness. She spoke of the children, of the need, and of a Savior who was real and present. She often used her platform to raise support for her orphanage, turning the spotlight away from her past and onto the present need. This final season of her life was one of strange contrasts. She was simultaneously a quiet, hands-on mother to her orphans in Taiwan and a global icon of faith. She navigated these two worlds with the same practicality that had always defined her. She understood that her fame was not her own. It was a tool given by God to be used for His purposes. She used it to give a voice to the voiceless and to remind the world that the work of the kingdom was still urgent. Her life had become a parable, and she was now its living narrator. On the 1st of January in 1970, at her home in Taiwan, Gladys Aylward's journey on this earth came to its peaceful end. She died as she had lived, surrounded by the Chinese children she considered her own. Her life was a complete, finished story. It was the story of a God who scoffs at human qualifications. He took a London maid, deemed unsuitable by the experts, and used her to calm a prison, to advise a Mandarin, and to save 100 children. He took a simple obedience and broadcast it to the world, not for her glory, but for His. Her legacy is not found in the celluloid of a film reel or even the pages of a book. It is found in the generations of lives changed by her work, the children of the orphanage and their children, a branching, growing tree of life. It is found in the countless people who heard her story and were inspired to step out in their own small acts of faith. Gladys Aylward, Aywede, the virtuous one, proved that no one is too small, too poor, or too unqualified to be used in a mighty way by God. All that is required is a heart that says yes and a willingness to take the first impossible step. Her life stands as a testament, a quiet but unshakable monument to the faithfulness of God. From the cold brass of a London home to the warm sanctuary of a Taiwan orphanage, her path was guided by a divine hand, proving that the greatest adventures are not reserved for the strong or the wise, but for those who are willing to simply trust and obey. The quiet art of letting go. Feel the final echoes of Gladys's story, the rhythmic clack-clack of the train, the steady pace of the mule trains, the relentless shuffle of 100 small feet. Hear the whispers of danger and the sound of quiet prayer in the cold ravine. All of these sounds, all of these vivid images now transition into a soothing, calming silence. Your mind has absorbed the truth that God is faithful even when the path ahead is invisible. With that truth held gently in your heart, let us practice the quiet art of letting go. Release the burdens of the day. Just as Gladys invited her listeners to take off their burdens, imagine them now, floating up from your chest and shoulders, dissipating into the soft, dim light of the room. The worries about tomorrow's schedule, the difficult conversation you had, the tasks you left unfinished, they're all safe. They're all being held in a providence larger than your own capability. You don't have to solve anything in this moment. You only have to rest. Allow your breath to deepen. Breathe in slowly and steadily, counting to the count of 4. Feel the air fill your lungs completely. Now, exhale just as slowly, letting go of any tension that remains in your body, counting again to the count of 5 or 6. This slow, deliberate rhythm is your anchor, a simple, consistent drumbeat that pulls you away from the noise of the day and deeper into the quiet of this moment. Breathe in, quiet strength and profound gratitude for the day that was. Breathe out any lingering stress, anxiety, or resistance to sleep. Breathe in, peace. Breathe out, trouble. Resting in the story of the unsuitable, the life of Gladys Aylward speaks volumes about the unlikely vessels God chooses. Remember her initial rejection by the Mission Society, the judgment of unsuitable. Tonight, let that memory bring you comfort. If you carry any sense of inadequacy tonight, any memory of a moment when you felt too small for the task before you, release it. The same God who used a simple parlor maid to lead 100 children across a war zone is the God who sustains you now. Your worth is established not by your striving, but by His endless love. Let the image of the Inn of the Eighth Happiness settle in your mind. It was a physical sanctuary built on hospitality and simple kindness. Imagine you are now resting in that inn. The courtyard is silent, the mule drivers are asleep, and the lantern of peace burns steadily at your bedside. You are safe, you are welcomed, you are finally home. The journey she made, the 9 pence a day voyage, the foot inspector's lonely walk, the march of the children, was a continuous, living proof that provision arrives precisely when it is needed. She never had a year's supply of food, only enough for the next day. She never had a sure path, only the courage for the next step. Allow that spirit of daily dependence to wash away your worries about the future. You don't need to solve the problems of next week tonight. You only need to trust the promise of provision for the next moment. The God who cares for the solitary sparrow is utterly attentive to your every need. A blessing of deep rest. Now, as your body grows heavier and your mind drifts softly toward the silence, let the final, collective power of her story envelop you. May you rest in the knowledge that the Mandarin's respect for Aylward demonstrates God's ability to soften the hardest of hearts and protect you even through unexpected human channels. May you sleep deeply, knowing that the peace she brought to the prison riot is the same gentle force that can calm the internal chaos of your own mind and deliver you from anxiety. May your rest be restorative, like the healing hand that brought Aylward back from the brink of collapse, reminding you that deep rest is not a luxury, but a sacred necessity after honest effort. The name she earned, Aylward, the virtuous one, now settles over you as a final blessing. You are virtuous in Christ. You are cherished. You are deeply loved. There is nothing left to achieve, nothing left to worry about. The work is done. You are safe. Drift now into the profound, quiet peace that Gladys Aylward sought and found. Let the steady rhythm of your breathing be the final reminder that God is with you, always with you, through the dark of the night and into the light of the morning. Rest, sleep, be at peace. Thank you for resting with us tonight and journeying through the inspiring, true story of Gladys Aylward. If this sleep story brought you peace, we invite you to subscribe to this channel. Subscribing is a simple step that helps us continue to create these deeply restful narratives, sharing the calming stories of faith that bring comfort to thousands every night. Please also consider sharing this episode with a friend or loved one who may be seeking peace or struggling with sleeplessness. Your simple act of sharing helps spread this blessing of quiet rest to others. Until we meet again, may you be filled with peace and find the deepest, most healing sleep. Good night.